Hey team, welcome to another episode of Ask Top, sponsored by MentorMilitary.com. This is the final episode discussing the impact of race and social unrest in our nation. In part one, we discussed the purpose of this series and introduced the panel members and discussed what we saw as the definition of racism from our perspectives. In part two, we discussed specific experiences we had with regard to racism, the impact of racism on each of us, and the impact of institutionalized racism. And today we conclude with the potential solutions. How can we take action against racism as individuals and members of society? Hey, if you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I encourage you to do that before you watch parts 3, as it'll lay the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. And before we get going, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel members. We've got Master Sergeant Richard Oz Green, because he's the guy behind the curtain. And we got Command Sergeant Major retired Garrick Griffin Green. And we got Command Sergeant Major Hurricane Mark Haliburton. What was that? You shot me there? Okay. I thought somebody was going
to... Stop.
All right. So before we go off on this, does anybody have anything they want to say before we get started?
Nah, Mark, I'm ready to go ahead and get started so we can pick up what we left off at.
All right. Let's jump in, and in your personal opinion, how do we resolve the current unrest in our nation and in our military and set a course towards healing and resolution? Who's first out of the batter's box?
If I could.
Hit it.
Hey, Mark, I would tell you, I mean, when you say fix it for our nation and the military, that's a daunting task for anybody. As my guys on here know, they know what I like to always say. If we as individuals, each one of us, handle our piece of the pie, and that is focus on the areas and focus on the things that we can control, the people that we talk to, the people we come in contact with, by us being an example ourselves of what it is, how to treat people right, I think at a point, it'll get better. But it requires everybody doing their part to be able to fix it for the entire military. I personally, I don't know if anybody else had an answer, but I think that's a hard answer to be able to fix it. Trying to fix the enterprise itself. That's just my take on it.
Mark?
I'll take the long, windy road, but I promise you I will get there quickly. If Command Sergeant Major retired Griffin tells me that the sky's blue, and he says the sky's blue, Master Sergeant Green, Oz says the sky's gray, right? The sky's blue by Griff. Griff says the sky's blue. Oz says the sky's gray. But Griff respects Oz's opinion and says, well, I still don't believe it's gray, but what if he's right? So then WORF comes on and says, well, I believe the sky is gray as well. And so what happens is we investigate beliefs without investigating facts, right? The facts will tell you what the color of the sky is, but we are so fixated on beliefs that we ignore the facts. And the facts tells you exactly what color the sky is, but we use what respected WORF is, respected Griff is, and their beliefs and how strongly they care about their beliefs, and we use their beliefs to overrule fact. I think how we overcome is we are passionately involved in what we believe. But if we take our belief systems out the way for a second and use facts, right? What does fact say? Fact says that an African American or black or what you want to label it, they're a human being. But your belief system, based on where you come from, says, well, this is what I believe about this race or this gender or whatever, instead of using facts. I think how we get ahead of that is we have to swallow our belief system about what we were taught and what we believe and what is fact. Facts provides us with information of things that we believe to be right. Not necessarily it is right, but we believe to be right. And now what's in the equation is our belief system. versus another person's belief system, instead of using the variable, which is fact, which is what will tell you how we get better at this. And I sat there, and why am I talking about this? Because I was thinking about this the other day. Is sometimes when we're raised, we develop our belief system from our parents, from our environment, and how we have shaped our belief system, but nobody ever comes in, and tells you that this is a fact. They want you to believe it so strongly that you believe it's fact, but they never give you the scientific evidence and data to back up that it's fact. And to me, that's a problem, because all of these issues that we see in our country is based off about a strong emotional belief system, not factual based, not evidence based, but belief based.
Okay, help me, because I'm 100,000% behind you with facts. To me, when you lay out the facts and when everybody agrees we're just going to discuss facts, we get cut and dry yes and no answers. To me, the problem becomes when most things that I see in dealing with racism's perceptions of racism aren't cut and dry. They're what I feel. I feel like I was mistreated. Was I mistreated? Did Mark say something to you that was rude, crude, ignorant, and obnoxious just because that's the type of guy he is? And you took it as racist, but he treats everybody else that way because he's just a rude guy? To me, that's the hard part. That's the really hard part, because it's how I feel I'm being treated. In some cases, it's point blank fact I'm being treated that way. Mm-hmm. It's clear. But how do we deal with that's how I feel?
It requires people coming forth and talking. That you just hit it on the head with that too, though, Mark. I mean, you can feel a certain way, but if you don't talk to somebody or talk to the person that made you feel that certain way, they gonna continue to act the way that they act, because they don't know no better. It's based off how they was brought up, their norms, what they believe in. We have to have the tough discussions. We have to sit down at the table and let people know how we feel, how we perceive things, because a lot of times, and I'm not making excuses for nobody, because in my personal opinion, a lot of times the people that do, certain racist type things, they do it intentionally. It's not on purpose. It's done intentionally. But it's the outliers out there that just don't know. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know what they're doing. And until somebody bring it to their attention and actually talk to them about it and have that conversation, we're going to continue to still have the same problems out there. And so conversation is the big thing. I guess if we really want to get at it, Mark talked about facts. Again, people look at facts as who present the facts and where did you get your facts from? Because what you consider to be facts might not be facts in my book, because everybody got a different story that's been written. Everybody got a different story. But being able to sit down and us talk, both being able to discuss the facts and the beliefs that we believe in without having to get into a fight about it, but actually being able to come to a point that maybe we even have to agree to disagree. I don't even think there's a lot of people not even agreeing to disagree no more. Either you believe what I say and we can be friends, or you don't believe what I say and we can't talk no more. That's one of the problems that I see in the world today.
We are a divided nation, that's for sure. Hey, Oz?
So, can y'all hear me fine?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, so I got a couple opinions here, and these are my opinions solely. The first thing I'm going to say is this. Every man and woman is entitled to their opinion, but no man or woman is entitled to be wrong. And what do I mean by that? Like, you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to not go out and do the research that's necessary to back your opinion up with facts. The other thing I'm going to say about solutions is this. When you look at solutions, each solution is going to vary based off of the person that's going to be receiving that solution or participating in that solution. Like Sergeant Major Griff said, you got some people that don't know. Like, we're all aware we have a system in the military where we evaluate problems, the can't know, the don't know, the won't do, and the can't do. It's going to fall into one of those three categories. And based off of what category it falls into, that's going to determine the approach that's going to be needed to take, to, hopefully rectify some of the things that's been going. My other point that I'm going to say before I hand the mic back over graciously is that people can't move forward until they heal, and people can't heal until they know. And when we look into history books and we look into encyclopedias and stuff like that, not just with this specific thing that we have, encyclopedias done been rewritten how many times? The truth changes with time based off of who writes it. So until...
And what new information becomes available.
Say again?
And hopefully with what new information becomes available.
Yes. But the point that I'm trying to get across is that there's a lot of things that were documented incorrectly, and there are a lot of things that aren't documented.
To the victor goes the spoils.
Exactly. Like people when we look at the Germans with with what happened over there, it's very clear. There were some ugly things that happened, but it was put out in the forefront and it was discussed. But the same thing hasn't taken place necessarily. There's data points in history that things have been pulled from, but there isn't a completely clear picture that's been agreed upon. But with that saying, I digress.
Give me an illustration of your first point.
Which part?
When you were talking, how did you say it? You said they don't have the right to be wrong.
So what I mean is this is like, I could sit here all day and say, this fire extinguisher is green and it's clearly red. It's clearly red. But me saying that it's green, and that goes back to what Sergeant Major Haliburton was talking about with the perception piece. Like, I know we always say perception is reality, but is that so? I know that's something it's an agreed upon thing, but your perception, just because you perceive something to be some way, you have implicit bias, you have confirmation biases, you have all of these biases and, these processes that work on your brain that changes how you perceive things. So is it truly as you see it, or are you missing facts? And that's why I say, like, everybody is entitled to their opinion, but you are not entitled to be just willfully wrong. Like, you're not going to do the research to find out what it is. Like, I just heard something on the radio, so it has to be true. I saw this on the internet, so it has to be true. I haven't done any research to back up the point that I'm trying to make right now. It's true because I said it's true.
And I'm going to partially agree with you because, yeah, you don't have the right to make up your own facts. But to me, when it comes down to things that are personal in nature, racism, that's a very, as we've talked before, it's a very personal event. I mean, it has a tremendous impact not only on that person, but potentially that person's family, their career. So, when I went to Yomi, one of the things they told us was, hey, it's not about what you meant or what you intended or what you thought. It's about the consequence. It's about what happened, how that person felt. It's about their perception is their reality. Now, I take that and I say, well, maybe we went a little bit too far on that side as well. And back to something that Griff said, you got to be able to talk, because without that, nobody moves anywhere. But because I do something or somebody does something to me and I have a perception that they're racist, they may not be racist at all. They may be having a bad day. That may be who their personality is. That may be how they treat everybody. But that's how I feel. That's how it's perceived to me. So it's real to me. That part becomes real to me. But I feel like I have a responsibility to probe that, to test that, to get facts to see if my perception is true, not just make decisions based on my perception. Because there's just so much of this that we as people, it's just not black and white to me. It's not right or wrong. It's somewhere in the middle. I don't know. Am I off?
I think you spot on. Look, so this month for me is Denzel December.
I've been telling you that.
So the other day I just happened to look at The Great Debater, and in that movie, you had kids from Wiley College and Harvard, and they was talking about social. They was basically talking about, is it right for somebody to be social disobedient? And Harvard was talking about that to allow people to break rules is wrong, and it creates chaos within the organization. And then the kids from Wiley was like, well, what rules are they breaking? And the example that they used in the movie, they was getting ready to go to a debate at school. And as they was getting ready to go debate this school, they ran into a lynch mob. Now, the rules in that day that was considered to be justice. Even though it wasn't justice, that was considered to be justice. And if they would have tried to stop the lynch mob from doing what they was doing, then they would have actually been considered to be wrong, which we all know that what they was doing, they done lynched this young man and burned him to death. And they got young kids sitting out there witnessing this. So now you done created another generation of people that think that this is all right, even though we know the Constitution say this is not right, but we still allow it. And so that's what they was debating about. And so it comes a time when you have to sit up and say, you know what, I know what the law is, I know what the facts are, but at some point we have to question the facts sometimes, and we have to sit down and have that debate. And that, what we was talking about, having that communication, that debate was important because it wasn't nobody fighting. It wasn't nobody, but each side got a chance to voice their opinion, and each side presented facts. And everybody in the room was able to actually get a better understanding of each point of view, and then was able to take it on. So communication for me is always going to be the key, is how we get people to come into a room and sit down and have these hard conversations. And they are hard. But that particular movie is sitting on me right now. Matter of fact, I want to go back and watch it again. If y'all haven't seen it, I'm going to tell you right now, it's very powerful.
What's it called?
It's in the 60s, during the Jim Crow era, and it's an actual true story.
What's the name of the movie?
The Great Debater.
I have not seen that one.
Yeah, you guys.
That's a Denzel movie?
It's one of Denzel's movies.
He
and
makes
it's
some awesome leadership movies.
So that movie, if I'm gonna tell you, if we at the Son Major Academy, they use Remember the Titans all the time.
That's an awesome movie.
They can also use The Great Debater when you start talking about leadership and dealing with stuff, because that movie right there is awesome.
We've talked about communication. We've talked about perception, and we've talked about, right and wrong, and that we have an individual responsibility. So let's think about this from the world we all come from, being a soldier. So when I was a young kid, 6 or 7 years old, my dad had just come back from Vietnam. He was a first sergeant at Fort Bragg. And I really didn't know him because he was gone all the time. And so he would take me to work with him on Saturday. And guess what the entire purpose of going to work on a Saturday in 1970 was?
To check the barracks?
Race relation class.
Back then?
Back then, 1970. And I remember that being a young kid. And we have our classes today, but when was the last time you could remember in your career when you sat down and just off the cuff had a conversation about race with soldiers? Or another hard subject, because we mentor about everything. We have our mentoring through what we do, what we say, how we act, the things we do, we don't do. But I don't ever remember, other than having a class, I take that back. Once, I can think of a chief of mine. We sat down and we had a serious conversation about race. To me, if we had some of those at the lower levels, I think communication lines could open up. Thoughts?
I think those classes, well, I won't call them classes, but I believe those conversations are happening. I don't believe they're happening on like a mass scale, but I do believe those conversations are happening. And the reason that I say that is because I had to get this from my little brother. My little brother was the one that basically made me see this. I want to say in 2015, like there was a big thing about where the rebel flag came up, and people started doing the research of it, and you know how it has presented itself through history and all of this stuff. And the one thing that he brought up was he said, look, he was like, we're from the South, and in the South you have a whole bunch of kids that just grew up together, and this thing is just something that was in their house. They're not racist. They're not, out to go hang nobody, or they don't have any hidden agendas. It was just like an heirloom in the house. And we just grew up together. So what I explained to him was this. I said, okay, that's a very good point. But in the same token, if I were to take a swastika and just put it somewhere and name it something else, that doesn't change the history of it. It doesn't change like what it stood for at some point. Now, where I'm going with this is this: because of the younger generation's belief and how they're moving through history and like where we're at right now, I believe those conversations are happening because from my experience, and I can only speak from what I've seen, like I said in the very beginning, like I did not experience a lot of the things that y'all experienced, and I believe that was due to the work that y'all had put in prior to me entering the military. Like we got 4 generations of soldiers sitting here on the screen right now. So me being in the 4th generation, I believe that I'm a byproduct of the work that y'all put in. So I do believe these conversations are happening. I think we need to shape how they happen though, because I think they're only happening in very specific settings where people feel comfortable.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
A couple of things. One, you brought up the flag, and I grew up in Europe. I was a military brat, but we settled in the South. And I took my daughter to what's the name of that park in Georgia that has the monument to the Stone Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
So I take her to Stone Mountain, and she's about 10, I guess. And we're sitting in this large field looking up at this beautiful Stone Mountain sculpture. And because I've taken her all over the place to see Mount Rushmore, all that kind of stuff. I said, honey, what do you know about that statue? She goes, I don't know, some military guys. I go, no, it's a little bit more than that. It's a bunch of traitors. And she said, traitors? I said, yeah, this was the Civil War. They succeeded from the Union. Call it for whatever reason you want, but they succeeded from the Union. And they chose to have conflict against the nation, so they were traitors. And I want you to think about this. Only in the United States, it's the only place I'm aware of that you can be a traitor to your nation, and fly your flag, and have a monument erected on your behalf. Mm-hmm. And I know part of that was Lincoln's peace process, was he wanted it to be a soft peace so that we would reunite quickly. But, it wasn't until, probably when she was 18 or 19, she came back to me one day and said, Dad, I finally get what you mean. Because everybody else, like you were saying, Green, hey, it's part of their family tradition. Hell, I just found out I'm related to Stonewall Jackson. Everybody I'm related to was on the wrong side of the war. But, I don't go around flying I understand that some people have the connection for some reason. Mm-hmm. I don't understand it, but I get it. The whole thing about moving monuments, I'm not so sure I support that, but I get it. I get that part of it. The other part I feel like is, when was the last time I paid attention to a Southern monument? Never. until everybody started raising Cain about it. Then I'm like, I never even knew that monument was there.
But why you didn't know it was there? It didn't affect because it didn't affect you.
Good point. I didn't care about it.
So you didn't care about it and nothing against it, but it didn't affect you.
You're right.
And people been arguing and fighting to get those monuments removed for decades, for generations. And it wasn't until, unfortunately, the murder of George Floyd that, guess what, it popped back up again. Because if you look at South Carolina and the flag flying over the state capitol there, they've been
Alabama.
For Alabama and all the other places. That's been going on for years. It'll come up for a minute, then guess what, it'll die down. We'll shoot a nugget, we'll throw a nugget out there at somebody, and everybody leave it alone until something else pops up.
If I am not mistaken, when we voted in the election, there was a thing for the state of Alabama to remove the language of slavery from the Constitution, from our Alabama state Constitution. And I'm like,
it was in Mississippi's state constitution as well until 1996.
And I'm going, okay, so we still got a
yeah.
Constitution that says that?
Oh yeah.
And then
Hey Mark, could I add something?
Sure.
There's since we talking, there's what I've gathered, over the course of time today and a couple of weeks ago and a couple of months ago, I call them the 8 F's. And based off of, when we started this whole series, I call them the 8 F's. And these 8 F's are inextricably linked to this discussion. And these F's are facts, family, feelings, first, finances, fallacy, foreign, and fear. These are all tied to our discussion. And the reason, and I'm not going to give you the in-depth definition of why I think they're inextricably linked, but I will kind of hit the waypoints. Because if you run the tape and go back, we've all hit 6 or 7 of these F's. We talked about family, we talked about facts, we talked about fear. We haven't necessarily talked about fallacy, and fallacy is, by definition, is an inaccurate belief in something that you think exists and is not. It's a fallacy. And finance is what we didn't talk about as well. Money.
Well, we talked about it, but we
did.
barely touched it.
We did, but money is the cliche and the old adage term, money's the root of all evil, because it is. It is. What we've talked about historically, it all centers around money. And the other thing is fear. We've talked about fear in our first 2 sessions, but fear drives you at points in time to ignore facts, right? It does, because of what you're scared of. And now going back to what I said, if I tell you 200 years ago that the fire extinguisher, like he said, is green, and no one else had the ability to read or write to dispute my point of the fire extinguisher being green, then this will snowball for 200 years and grow steam and emotion. And now we're going to, what I've established already, because I was the only one who was able to read and write, and the literacy rate was high for the people who are my contemporaries. I've established that. Now I have to dispute that. And so what happens is now that I have family support, now what is initially, what is found out afterwards is a fallacy, you have to prove that. And so now we have history against us. We have family against us. We have fear against us. We have finance against us. We have all these F's against us. And so to me, sitting back and looking at this, it's really easy to say, well, this person 200 years ago said, African Americans are 3/5 of a man, right? And I put this in our Constitution, right? That we're 3/5 of a man. And now I have to go back and dispute that. Something that isn't a doctrine that was signed by 55 founders of our country, that's in black and white, no pun intended, and now I have to dispute that I'm more than 3/5 of a person. And so now I have because at the end of the day, we have, 26 amendments to a document that was considered linked to the Magna Carta based off of us being a human. And so if I have this document that says this is right based off of regardless of what you look like, but in writing it says I'm 3/5 of a man. So now we arguing with what most believe is a neutral document, but is it? Is it a neutral document? And so I guess my question is this is where we have to have these conversations to kind of understand and explain the way we see it. Because we all have heard how African Americans were considered 3/5 of a man, right? In black and white.
Yes.
And so what facts do I have to dispute something that was placed in a document that we considered undefeatable? You know? And so now I'm challenging a document that is signed by the forefathers of our country that I'm more than 3/5 of a person. And so to me, it's going to take for all of us to sit down and have these conversations and to truly go against the fact that, it happened in the past. It's a fallacy because I'm more than 3/5 of a person, and have that tough conversation. Because when I first heard that, in black and white, that I was 3/5 of a person, because of finances, because of 80% of the people who signed that document were legalized slave owners, right? And so to me, this is where we got to understand truly what that means. And so I can go on a diatribe about it, but to me, I call it the 8S.
Well, you brought up something that, again, every time we have these conversations, sometimes I think about things in a different perspective. Here I am, I'm a black child sitting in school going through history class and finding out that I'm 3/5 of a person when I'm in the best nation on earth. And we are what other countries want to be like. And I said something last time we talked to take the facts or the information. I think you said it something like in accordance with the time or when it was
Time, place, and condition.
Time, place, and condition. But I also have to look back and say, all right, these guys were intelligent men writing this document. They knew, at least I believe in my heart, they knew what they were doing was wrong. But time, place, and conditions, that's how they operated. It's not right. I think it was very clear that what they were doing was treating other people less than human, less than they would want themselves treated. But I had never thought of it from the perspective of being a black child sitting in a history class and having to learn or be told that I was less than someone else.
I can put it in another sense. So I had a very hard time growing up learning about black history, and I don't blame my parents for not teaching black history because I recently started to research my family tree, and I'm thinking about the things that my parents went through in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, and it's difficult for them to talk about. Like, I get it. It's not something that they just wanted to talk about, like talking to my grandfather who was a Vietnam vet, talking to my great-great-grandfather, but I get it. It was difficult for them to talk about. So when I got to high school and we started reading things like To Kill a Mockingbird, and we started reading, watching American History X and all of this stuff, and you start seeing all of these images and stuff, like, it infuriates you because you see people that look like you just being slaughtered and disrespected in the most horrible way that you can think of. And it's just something that you just don't want to deal with. You kind of try to block it out. Well, fast forward a little bit, I came to the Army, and the Army builds confidence, and, it gives you things that you tools that you necessarily didn't have before to be able to deal with some things. And I started to go to college, and I started to do my own research, and I started to learn about this history. And this is why I completely disagree with Morgan Freeman when he says if we want to fix the black history problem, we need to just stop talking about it. Completely disagree with it. I think we need to change how we approach. I mean, we need to change our approach. Like Sergeant Major Griff say all the time, we need to be flexible on our approach with how we talk about the situation and how we introduce it to the young, because it's overwhelming. It's a lot. Like this is something very, very horrible. Like it's traumatic. That's the only way I can. It's like you can get PTSD just from taking all of this stuff in, you know. So I think the process in which we introduce this to the young or just to people in general, that I think that process needs to be refined, and you know, we need to go at it from that angle. Sermon.
I think when you look at our education period, the reason why a lot of our kids don't understand, because what I'm being taught in school is completely different was what you're being taught in school, Mark. It is. I'm just going to be honest. They're not talking about, because again, people are embarrassed, and I understand they're ashamed. They're ashamed. And this is what I will say too. The founding fathers, like you said, they knew that what they was doing was wrong, but they was the time, space, or whatever. But they made it to where you could make amendments, because I guess they in their mind they said later on down the line somebody gonna realize what we're doing is wrong, and we need to make sure that this document we can amend this document so that we can make some of those changes. Like with everybody else, we talk about it at the Sergeant Major Academy. They was all in that group think mode. You know, one person come up and they was all group thinking, and they didn't want to look bad. But I think what I learned in school, what I learned in Alabama history, I can tell you people across the track from me, they learn the same Alabama history. They probably, what they was taught about George Wallace and what I was taught about George Wallace was completely different. And so where I think we get at it, one, we got to start in our schools, because I believe institutions build baselines. But if we don't all have the same baseline, then we all going to continue to have the same problem. If we're not teaching all of our kids the exact same thing, guess what? They always going to continue to be thinking differently. It's going to be one group that think, you know what, slavery was not what people made it out to be. It was not bad. It was for so that we can grow the country. But then in another classroom, they showing you how brutal people were. And the conversations have to be had, and we have to fix the education system. We have to establish foundations in our institutional places, and then we have to have conversations. Now, before I shut up, to get back to your original question was, I personally think the conversations like Green say are happening, because I know that I never waited for some form of training to have certain conversations. Matter of fact, in a promotion board, I might be had, because it might be the news topic of the day. I'm sitting up there, we having this conversation with the kid that's coming into the board. In the motor pool, I always had different conversations. When we start talking about transgenders, when we start talking about females working in combat arms units, that, you know, that's a hard conversation still to this day for some people to have a conversation about. And so, but I never waited for any formal training to come down, because I think the best thing that you can do, because when you make stuff formal, people don't really want to do it, because now it's somewhat rigid.
Well, it's a check in the block versus. And
that's how they look at it. They look at it as you checking the block, and it's somewhat rigid, and we got to stick to this. But when you sit down and, hey, you know, guys, girl, let's just come around. Let's have this conversation. What do you think about this? How do you feel about racism? And I will say this, because Mark has hosted a couple of these things on the freestyle. When the George Floyd stuff happened, we was talking about this way before anything came down from Big Army. Hey, y'all got to start having these conversations now. You got soldiers in your formation that's hurting right now, that don't know what to say. They don't know what they can say. They don't know what they can't say. And while we waiting on a Big Army to come down with some formal presentation, the soldiers, some of them gonna go out there and get themselves in some serious trouble. So I think if you look at from when, I'm just using the George Floyd situation to now, I haven't seen a lot of soldiers getting in a lot of trouble. So that tells me that somebody been having some conversations with people and having those hard conversations.
And that's kind of what sparked. That's what sparked this. I talked to Hurricane. Mark, it was right after we met on freestyle, and I said, "Hey, the conversation I'd really like to have is about race." Mm-hmm. And I agree with you about the school thing, but I don't feel like I saw that side of it, because when I went to school, my school was majority African American, but now you made me question something. My school may have been majority African American. However, what was our curriculum compared to another curriculum somewhere else? I don't know.
Yeah.
What you got, Hurricane?
Hey, so I got two things. In 2006, the Army implemented, 2007, the Army brought back the instructor qualification through drill sergeant school, right? They said, okay, we want the drill sergeants to be instructor qualified. You was like, why does a drill sergeant need to be instructor qualified? I'm going somewhere with this. Then in 2008, 2009, the Army formalized, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell with General Ham, went across the Army, structured this brief, and then there was a phase-based approach of how leaders can talk to their soldiers about, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell implementation. And of course, then 2016, the transgender things happened, same thing. Before that, you rarely heard when the Army changed its philosophy on a policy change, a POI was built for leaders how to talk to their soldiers. You know why? It's because we're in an Army now where soldiers don't have the interpersonal communication skills that were possessed the 90s, the early 2000s. They don't have those skills, right? You don't have the skills to sit down with a person to have these informal, uncomfortable conversations with each other to get at a point. Why? It's because of the way our social environment is structured. There's a myriad of reasons why. And you can't point your finger on and say this is a root cause, but there are reasons. And the Army figured out that we have to structure to have these conversations if we want these soldiers to have them. Because of the leaders at that time, sergeant to staff sergeant ranked, really couldn't have those conversations because society held, you've seen some times where the only time a young sergeant in 2008 has even, let's talk about Dayton. Think about that. That's when Dayton websites was at an all-time high. They entered a market in 2007, 2008. Never before you hit a Dayton game, all interpersonal relationships, but you never had a website where Plenty of Fish, or you pick all your other Dayton sites, they came on the market because they capitalized on the issues soldiers were having with interpersonal communication. And so that plays a part in our ability to communicate. I'll back up one more when you said, Griff, about our education system. Our books in school are peer-reviewed, right? Are peer-reviewed educational that are taking the research of a particular person, peer-reviewed based off their feelings and their research with another peer, and then established. It's funny how all 50 states have different metrics to where they approve education. For instance, in the state of Missouri, they use the Iowa Test of Basic Skills to validate their kindergarten, kindergarten, high school, and middle school test base. They use a different state. But we don't have a federal level where states can go through and measure a baseline with all academics. Every state has their own, and they take these, in my opinion, these flawed accounts of education and place them in our school. And you're right, Griff, what I learned in school on George Wallace was different when I learned on George Wallace in college. I got two different variances of what George Wallace was. In George Wallace in the school in the state of Alabama, I received how George Wallace was a hero and he fought the government. But when I went to school and college, I seen George Wallace as anti-government, and he didn't support the government
and racist
and racist, or even in Little Rock, And so my point is that's where I see in issues is when we looking at, as time progresses, the way we communicate and deliver information, it changes. From when I was a basic trainee to, like you said, Oz, is your fourth generation, and you're looking at the way you receive information. There's difference. So we can't look at it all the same, even though we still wear the same uniform. My final point is that there's, to me, this is a conversation that will continue to grow as we have it, but we have to have it. And where does that conversation start? And that's an open-ended question I'm going to leave. Where did the conversation start?
And I'm going to go back to something that Oz said. You talked about a swastika. How many of you served in Korea? How many of you saw the swastika in Korea? It's the same sign. I remember the first time I saw it, I did a double take and went, why is there a swastika flying over that door? Did you guys find out what the swastika meant in Korea?
I'm going to just be honest with you. I didn't, because of how I've been educated and taught. That's just a place that I need not to go.
That is a religious symbol.
Yeah.
In Korea. And that's where the Nazis stole it from.
Wow.
Not in Korea, but in Asia. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, we see that swastika, or what we see of it in the West, and it has a totally different meaning to somebody that lives in Asia. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot to be said about perception, because it's a dangerous thing. As we start to move on to the next one, anybody got anything else as we wrap this one up?
No.
Okay. What is the solution? Not that there is one, but what is the solution to resolving institutional inequality? What do we do? We talked about it existed. We talked about it's out there, and it's probably always going to be out there to some degree. But what do we do as individuals and as a collective leadership group?
I'm gonna take this one first. So I believe the first thing is that we have to keep open minds and keep pushing the envelope, because if we don't keep pushing the envelope, then all of these firsts would never happen. And for there to be a second and a third, there has to be a first. So people have to be courageous enough to say, you know what, I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to go away from what we're used to, and I'm going to push this envelope, because I believe that, there's more, there are more people out here other than the people that fit in this specific box right here that can accomplish these things that have been being accomplished. So that's what I believe. Like, we have to keep pushing the envelope. We have to keep an open mind, and we got to pay it forward, because they say, one thing I've heard people say is that you may forget what, like, somebody's name or their face or something like that, but you'll never forget how somebody made you feel. Mm-hmm. So if we keep paying it forward and keep pushing that envelope, and just keep pushing that envelope, I think that'll do wonders.
I think honestly, Mark, I think serving 30 years in the military is in a complete different state than it was when I first came in. See, we want solutions because we're in a microwave generation. We want stuff to happen right now. It's not. We didn't get here overnight. We still talking about stuff that happened 400 years ago. And so we definitely not going to get fixed overnight. But I have seen progress. Has the progress been as fast as I want the progress to be? No, but I still see it's constantly going in the right direction. 30 years ago, no way would we ever thought that we would have had a black president. No way we would have thought that we would have a black vice president. Those was topics that, that was taboo back then. But now we're seeing it come to fruition. And I think as time goes on, and maybe in our lifetime, we're going to see our first female president. But the solution for me, is to continue to have these conversations, control the things that you can control, and to make sure that the conversations never stop. That's the only way that we're going to continue to grow. We won't get there overnight. I don't think it's no solution, because here it is again. We have been exposed to stuff in the military that a lot of our friends back home never been exposed to, never had the opportunity to be around different cultures, different races, and see the goodness in people. And so you're talking about, again, you're trying to erase generations of stuff that's been built up in them, and it's going to take some time. I would venture to say that my mindset would probably be completely different if I never came into the military. I would probably be a very angry person if I never came into the military. Because those videos that you see in Birmingham with people being sprayed by hoses and dogs, my mama was out there somewhere. And my grandfather is 88 years old, and he ain't lived nowhere but Birmingham, Alabama. So in his 40s and 50s, he was called a boy by people that was much younger than him. And so, but now when I go home, I understand what the anger and stuff, and some of that stuff is, I mean, it's still in them. And I can understand what the anger is, but I have been exposed to something, so I got something completely different. So I just think we still have to, and we can't we got to have those hard conversations with people that look like us too. Because a lot of times, you know, we try to focus on the other race, but we don't go back home and try to change the hearts and minds of the people that look just like us. You know, I had to bring some of my friends home because I'm telling some of my guys, some of the people I grew up with, and they ain't trying to have no conversation with a white guy. They don't trust them. I'm just gonna be honest. There's no trust there because of what they've been exposed to. And I had to bring some of my friends home and let them know it's not as bad. It's just, look, I understand how you grew up. I know where you came. And then it was educational for my friend as well that I brought home. Because then they understand, just like you said, when you had these conversations with us and there's certain things that you didn't even think about, it's because nobody ever sat down and had the conversation like we having the conversation right now. The conversation's out there happening, and I think the solution is just don't let the ball drop. Keep like I said, let it keep it go forward. Keep on making it do what it do. Make sure you find somebody that's in your footprint that you know that's going to continue to carry the torch to make sure that the conversations never die.
Hey, you know, I'll bring up three words: experience, expectation, and emotion. Experience is going through what you go through in your life. You know, the racism, the trials, the inequality, the systematic racism, you name it. But then the expectation of Barack Obama becoming the president of the United States. There's an expectation that being in the highest office in the world, that you're expected to eradicate 400 years of mistreatment, 400 years of whatever. But then the problem is emotion is tied to that. When Barack Obama was selected to become the president of the United States, there was a lot of emotion tied to his election, right? Because of the experience and the expectation. What we experienced and what we expected was cemented by emotion. Most people who reminded of that day became emotional when he was elected and sworn in. You know, if you go back and talk to a lot of African Americans and blacks that were, when that happened, they became emotional because they believed that the experiences and the expectations of what he is about to embark upon is going to erase all of these tumultuous memories and trauma that black people have been through the last 400 years. But then as time went on, you find what people seen was he was just trying to stay in position and be equal for everybody. And so one person, their expectations, but to me, I think in the future is one person is not going to change it. One person is not going to change it. You know, you're going to have several people to enter into this arena called equality, which is the last E that I'm going to talk about, that everyone's equal. And we establish these baselines that we're not necessarily trying to fight for what happened in the past, but we're just trying to equalize and establish what's happened today and what's going on now. And so all I ask, what my 2 cents and my last 2 cents, because I got to run, guys, is that, you know, we've got to understand that emotion does erupt and it becomes volatile when we're talking about these discussions because of what we see and what we expect.
Hey, Mark, since you got to run, I want to jump to number 4 real quick because you brought this question up, and I'd never heard of it. Do we, as an Army institution, institute the Rooney Rule to ensure equality? You got enough time to talk about that?
I do. I do. You know, the Rooney Rule, Art Rooney, Pittsburgh Steelers owner, was instituted because in sports, African Americans, they wasn't being interviewed for jobs, for coaching jobs. There wasn't. You know, and of course you can look at affirmative action as a kind of a counterpart in the job market based on the Rooney Rule, is having a certain amount of African Americans. But to me, I think the connective word to all of those are opportunity. You know, being provided an opportunity, you know, to compete for a job, whether you deserve it or not, to me is the equalizer. But when I'm equally talented or greater and have skill sets for a position or better than a person that people are favored, to me, having an opportunity to compete for that is very important. And a lot of people disagree with the Rooney Rule. It's like, well, what do you mean? Why do we have to interview an African-American coach? I mean, think about this. Look at Pittsburgh Steelers coach right now. They're the number one team in the National Football League, and their head coach, Tomlin, is an African-American. I think that's kind of odd that the Rooney Rule, started by the Pittsburgh Steelers, have as a black coach, and the coach that they've kept, but he's successful. He's a hard-nosed, tough, fair. He's a great coach. And I think that is, I want to say it's funny, but I think that's humorous. I do. That the rule started by a team has a coach who's one of the longest tenured coaches in the NFL, in the history of the NFL, by the way.
14 years.
You know, and hasn't been fired. And yes, they have some losing season, they have some struggle, but he hasn't been fired. Look where they are now. And so to me, you know, he's never held a head coaching job before ever in the NFL. He had a lot of assistant jobs, graduate of William Mary. Did a lot of research on Mike Tomlin. Graduate of William Mary there in Virginia, comes to the National Football League, and look what he's doing. He is making good men great. And so my point is if the Rooney Rule wasn't intact, Mike Tomlin would probably not have the opportunity to interview for that job based off of his experiences. But because they had to do it, they had to interview a minority. And look what he was the first choice from Art Rooney himself. And so to me, I'm not falling back and says, well, you know, just because they're African-American, they have it. But to me, if you look at a lot of positions and a lot of jobs, a lot of talented and great and capable African-Americans are not getting the opportunity because no one is putting them in the position, not because their work ethic doesn't bring them to the table. It's the people don't want them at the table. And I think the Rooney Rule, I agree with the Rooney Rule. Call me wrong, right, or indifferent, I agree with it. Because it's given a African-American dominated sport where 79% of the players in the NFL are African-American. Then how come the people that coach the team shouldn't have equal or greater representation at the head coaching level of a sport that is dominated by one? And so to me, that's where, you know, I kind of stop for it. That's why I brought that up, Mark.
See, from the other side of the fence, I would look at it this way. Anybody that's qualified should be able to be interviewed. I mean, that's just it. Does my race have to play a part of me being interviewed? Now, let's back up and look at it a little bit differently. Before affirmative action was started, I don't care how qualified you were, you probably weren't going to be looked at at all. So that opened a door that started making things happen. Mm-hmm. And I always go back to, I want the qualified people, whoever they are, mm-hmm. to be the people in the running. But until you brought up the Rooney Rule, man, I'd never heard of it. Wow. But are you saying that if the Rooney Rule was not in place, this guy probably wouldn't even have had the opportunity to be interviewed? Or
I agree with that 100%. I think Mike Tomlin would have been, I mean, think about it. Pittsburgh Steelers is one of those teams, like the Dallas Cowboys, that are a country's favorite. No matter what region you're in, you know, Pittsburgh Steelers, you go to Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, wherever, people are Steelers fans. And to me, having that rule and then having him, Mike Tomlin, to me, he, in my opinion, and I'm not a, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I strongly believe without the Rooney Rule, Mike Tomlin would not have been in that room because of no one knew who he was.
Okay.
I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably would have got a job eventually, but he wouldn't have got it as soon as he got it. With the Rooney Rule don't say that you have to hire.
Just interview.
You just got to give them the opportunity to get the interview. And I know a lot of people don't like affirmative action, but again, who are the people that don't like affirmative action?
Well,
It's the people. Normally, it's the people that know for a fact that they wouldn't be in the position that they were in if the person, another person that don't look like me got the opportunity to interview for the job. That I know is more qualified than me. I equate it to being an NCO and being an officer. At the end of the day, I'm just being honest, Mark. And some will disagree, but most officers, they're not as qualified for the job as they think they are. The most qualified person is the one that wears those chevrons, but on the flip side of it, that person also made a choice to continue to wear those chevrons too. We trained every last one of those officers.
have you ever noticed how the Army pairs officers and NCOs? We take a young officer in terms of experience and time in service and pair them with someone with more time in service and more experience to help groom them. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how the officer corps, other than their professional billets and their schooling, their on-the-job training comes from a professional NCO corps. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you think about that, every one of those NCOs has the opportunity, if they choose, to be an officer. So, Oz, what were you going to say?
You walked me right into what I want to talk about. So there's a dichotomy here that we're talking about. Like it's multi-layered, and the part of the dichotomy that I want to talk about is success is when opportunity meets preparation, right? So if success is when opportunity meets preparation, like the Steelers coach, at some point there was some preparation done for him to be prepared to take that job. But look at the people that don't ever get the preparation because of where they're from or the environment that they're in. Like, they may have never had it. Just like we talk about the officers and the NCOs. That success comes from the preparation that those NCOs went through so that they can give that information to that officer later on at some point. So I think we have to look at the preparation part. I forgot, there was a video that one of my mentors sent me where there was a panel of generals and sergeant majors talking. Sergeant Major Griffin, I think we talked about it, where we were talking about how, that sergeant major, he had been through some stuff. He had got put through some stuff, but one of the things that they were talking about in there was like how we needed to prep the next generation. So if we see somebody who has talent, then that preparation needs to be put into them so that they can reach that next level. But if we don't find those people that has that talent, so we can help them prepare those skills to match that talent so that they can go to catapult them even further than they could go, then we're going to continue to see what we're seeing now. Like, the opportunities may be made available, but you're not prepared. That preparation wasn't put there for you to take advantage of those opportunities.
I think that's why professional development, and I just had that conversation with Sergeant Major Noble the other day. You have to always identify talent within your organization and start preparing them. And that's why, we start these programs, these developmental programs and stuff like that. But on the flip side of it, if you didn't have stuff like the Rooney Rule or affirmative action, even the most prepared people will probably never get that opportunity to serve in positions of greater responsibility. And so that's the one thing that, I think with some of the things that the Army has implemented now, like some people getting upset about it, but again, it's a part of change. They done took the DA photo out. They done took race out. They done took all this stuff out so that when you're looking at Griffin's records now, although The verdict is still out or the jury is still in on it. But when you're looking at these records now, you don't see nothing but the records. You don't see the picture. You don't see the color. You don't see the race. I would love to see what the analytics is or what the demographics turn out to be after they start looking at the records now, the way they're looking at it. That would be a conversation I would like to hear. Did it open up opportunities for more minorities, or did more minorities get set to the sideline because their records weren't as good as they thought they were? So I'm looking forward to seeing what that's going to turn. But I still think that the Army still went in a direction to show people, hey, look, we willing to change. We listening to y'all. We hearing what y'all saying. Although some of the old heads, they don't hear it, but it's okay. That's why the old heads not in the military no more.
But when you're just looking at data, now all they're going to be doing is looking at data.
Yeah, and I think we definitely gonna get the right person for some of these jobs now. But we'll see.
Last question, because I'm trying to get everything in here before Mark has to leave.
Okay.
What is the one thing each person, each of us, could do to help resolve the issue of racism?
I let Mark go first since he has to leave.
For one, is validate that it exists. You know, if I don't validate that I have a broken ankle, and that, a lot of senior leaders, senior sergeants, first class, and first sergeants specifically, they're bad at this. I got an ankle that's broken, but I want to get out there on a 2-mile track and run on it and push myself, even though I know it's hurting. But I want to use my courage and my conviction to defeat what I know is clear and evident, that I got a broken ankle, right? Or a sprained ankle or a damaged ankle. That, to me, my feelings and emotion is stronger than the damage in my ankle. I think what we have to do as senior leaders is understand that if something is broken, it's broken, period. And if something is broken, you don't run or you don't move on something that's broken. You wouldn't build your house on a broken foundation. You wouldn't do it. Because why? Because you lose so much money. So why would you run on a broken ankle? To prove someone else that they can? So why would you try to look at a broken system such as what we have as far as equality and race relations that's broken, that I believe is broken, and then try to acknowledge the fact or not acknowledge the fact that exists and then build upon that? To me, that's why we have issues, is because I think it's embarrassing as a people to admit the fact that we have these issues. No one wants to admit that. Because if you think about it, if we sit back as leaders and say, you know what, I agree that we have it. How many people that without somebody putting their hand up, their fourth point of contact and playing puppet master, that come out and state that there's issues going on, and then we say, well, we'll do this and we'll do this. If we're doing all these things, why are we doing these things? Don't say I'm doing these things because it's better. Say why I'm doing these things. If we take out a DA photo, we say I'm taking out a DA photo because I think this will be better. How about this? We're taking out a DA photo because we believe that there's racial issues and people being discounted based off the color of their skin. That's two ways to look at it. You saying I'm looking at the way because I'm improving, or I'm looking at the way that we got issues. It's all about perspective. And so to me, perspective is the problem. It's something that we need to look at and get better at, and not just underwrite these things that, hey, we're progressively getting better. I don't like that. I think we need to state why we're doing it.
And Mark,
be real.
In fairness to the Army, I believe they did. They came out and said that they wanted to remove unconscious bias from the system. Now, unconscious bias in and of itself means, I don't know, it's there. Maybe I'm making the decision based on a bias I have, not an open racist bias, but subconsciously I've got one.
Mark, you're making my point. We want to remove it, but you have to establish it was there. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that these existed.
Right.
This happened. People were, and that's what I mean by that, is that you got to establish that this exists and this is a problem. But if you say we're trying to eliminate it, you're indirectly stating that it existed. And so to me, corporations such as the Army and other things, very wordy on how to indirectly say something without directly mentioning the problem. A lot of people get real cute on wording. Words have meaning. And so sometimes we get real cute of mentioning something but not necessarily addressing the issue.
I forgot who it was. There's a general a couple months ago. I forgot who it was, but it came out when he was talking about like having conversations with units and stuff. And he said very plainly, this is a problem. This will not be tolerated. We will fix this. And this is how I'm looking at, this is how I see racism. Like this is my analogy. So imagine a kid going to school getting bullied. And that kid goes to the guidance counselor, goes to the teacher, goes to his parents and say, hey, I'm getting bullied at school. And they're like, you know what? Hey, just deal with it. Just deal with it. Go to school, tough it out. And then that kid gets bullied to the point of where they do something and they harm themselves because they feel that it will be easier for them to harm themselves than to deal with the situations that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And this is like, I agree with the Hurricane when he says like, we gotta admit that it exists. Nobody's asking anybody to like take credit for something that they had no part in 200, 300 years ago, because that's always the segue that the conversation goes into. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is like, we get it. We have brothers and sisters. We're not calling you racist, but what we are saying is that there are people out there with these belief systems and they operate in this capacity. And what we're saying is that we need to come together as a collective, regardless of creed, color, or race or whatever, and say, this is a problem. We will not deal with it. It's unacceptable. And that's not how we're going to do business. And I think for the most part, you know, that's what we believe. It hasn't been stated. So that's where I'm at on it. I think that's what we could do. And to eradicate is a strong word because I don't see it. I'm gonna just be honest. I don't see it being eradicated, but I can see it drastically being decreased.
Well, I think you're right. Leadership has to call it out. Leadership has to make it a priority. Leadership has to determine if they're going to live with something they want to dance around or something they want to solve. And once those leaders start calling that out, subordinate leaders start taking action. And you start getting two-way communication from bottom to top, top to bottom. And things start to change.
Mm. So you see, Mark, so that's where my answer would come. See, I believe when answering your question is that my audio and my video has to match. So if I want change in my organization, I have to be the change that I want to see. And so I'm a firm believer in focusing on the things that I can control, because I know even though I'm not in the military, I still provide a lot of advice to some of my soldiers. I still, some of my civilians that I came in contact with. And so I have to, make sure that my audio and my video match. The information that I'm providing them, I have to make sure I'm living by it too. Because I know in order for me to help fix the overall problem by me providing them the right information, they're going to leave me and they're going to come in contact with some other people. And then they're going to have that conversation. And then the next person going, and that's part of the legacy. That's what me and Oz was talking about. See, if you do the right things now, people might not remember your name, but a piece of you going to live long after you. If the conversations that you're having right now, the hard conversations, I know for a fact there's some people that I don't know, but I've been carrying their torch in the 30 years that I was in the military, because somebody that I came in contact with gave it to me. They exposed me to it. And so I just feel like for me to do my part, I have to be the change that I want to see, and that my audio and video has to match. If I want equality, I have to treat people with equality, regardless of race, color, or creed. And I have to sit down and have those conversations if I want my subordinates to have those same type of conversations. I have to be accessible and I have to be approachable to have these type of conversations. You know, I got to be willing to sit down when I can't always expect the soldiers to sit down or the civilian to sit down when I want to have a conversation. They might want to have a conversation, and guess what? I got to be open and be ready to have that conversation as well. So that's my part. That's how I feel like I can give back to it. And I just think if everybody do the things that they can control, we'll see a better word. And I done seen it. I know it works.
Well, you know, from listening to you guys today, I think, at least from what I heard, we're pretty much all on the same sheet of music. One thing, though, is when we talk about the systemic issues, for me, it's got to be identified. And sometimes it's real easy to identify it. But, you know, I'm sure there are things that you potentially see as an issue because of your life experience, your backgrounds, where you came from, that I don't see as an issue. The only way I'm going to see it as an issue is when somebody shares with me it's an issue, because I'm not thinking from that perspective or frame of mind. But once I am and we're on the same sheet of music, then not only it's not good enough to talk about it, we got to find the influencers. Mm-hmm. Now, once we get those influencers on board, now we can start talking about how do we make change. You know, I'd almost like to see something where I don't want it turned into something formal, but, you know, if we were having hard conversations with members of our squads, but too frequently what I found is politics, religion, and race we don't talk about because people get in arguments over that. So we just avoid it rather than talk about it. To me, it's a subject that needs to be had because there's more than one facet of that conversation, as we've shared today. And when we've come a long way, but there's so much more to be done. How do we do that? What do Army leaders do to start making change? But as an individual, I have, as far as I'm concerned, I have an individual responsibility to make sure I'm doing what's right. If I see something that's wrong, I got a responsibility to fix that. If I can't fix it, I got a responsibility to call it out or bring it to somebody that can potentially fix it. I can only fix so much. Anybody got any parting words? Mark?
I'm going to say one more thing. So the one thing that I took from ALC when Sergeant Major Griffin was the first sergeant over there, like, and I've used this my entire career, was those vignettes. Like, I learned a lot of stuff in ALC, but the one thing that I took from it was the vignettes. And the vignettes were so powerful because it was a way of communicating that I wasn't used to communicating. And it showed me that you can take a group of people and sit down and we can talk about whatever. You know, we just got to stay professional. And I had never been exposed to that. So I believe that the tools are already there for us to do what we need to do. And back to what Sergeant Major Haliburton was saying, was that he called them skills. He said social skills. And the thing about skills is that they can be developed. So we can develop these skills, and we have the tools that we need to develop the skills. But I believe the vignettes are the way to go. Start pushing those vignettes so that those teams and squads and those pieces of the pies that Sergeant Major Griff always talking about, we can start taking care of those pieces of the pies at our level instead of waiting for a directive to come from higher.
Mark, you want to wrap up your side?
Yeah. Hey, one, it was awesome. And you know, those vignettes, you know, the Army come with the adult learner model. And the adult learner model, I completely agree with it. You know, the pedagogy method versus andragogy method, which means student in front of teacher, or student teacher, and then of course the experience base where we all have developed each other's experiences and skill sets to kind of get after a problem, and which encourages initiative and being a self-starter. And I think the Army going to that is probably one of the best decisions, in my opinion, and when it comes to professional development force, is when people are encouraged because of our experiences and shared knowledge to get after an objective, as opposed to if a teacher says, here's the metric, you need to get to this metric, and that defines learning. That doesn't define learning. And I think the Army adopting that philosophy is critical. But I also think is imperative that we move forward with that philosophy using the andragogy method, which means that our shared experiences and where we come from as a people and as soldiers is what's going to enhance our ability to understand where our future lies. Because to me, experiential learning is the best teacher, not teaching the student. But that's all I had, Mark. Great point, Oz.
Griff?
Hey, I think everybody has said enough, man. Like I said, Mark, I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that you gave me this opportunity again, just to give back, to sit down and have these conversations. Just like you, I learn a lot as well. I appreciate the fact that you put this panel together for us to have these tough conversations, and I just hope that in some shape, form, or fashion that we can help some people out there so they can carry the torch in their particular areas and make that change that we've been talking about to help the problem that we got.
Well, as I wrap this up, guys, I can't thank you enough. You're all honorable guys, great leaders. I've learned so much from you. But also, if somebody reaches out and contacts me and wants to contact you, do you mind if I put them in contact with you guys?
No issues, none whatsoever.
All right, so we're going to wrap this one up. And in this series, we've taken a hard look at racism, its impact and potential solutions. Collectively, we don't necessarily agree on every subject, but we've respected one another's opinion. And remember, there are some absolute answers when it comes to racism. There's right and wrong. But there's also far more questions that don't have right and wrong answers because we as individuals are sum of our experiences. All we can do is actively listen to one another, respect one another, and try to find some common ground. We've got to find that common ground. So if you guys found some value in our discussion today, please hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, or tell us about a subject you'd like to hear about in the future. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for watching.